I had it all figured out now that the place was built. This was a bachelor house. No woman would live here with me. Not Lily, not anyone else. Sure, I'd have them visit me, but this was for me to roam around in, alone. There are some things a man has to have to himself. A busy fellow like Flynn needs some peace sometimes. I am in my mid-40s. They say I am a sight to behold, compared with my looks a few years back. I can hear them a few feet away. My God, how he's changed. I feel like rebelling every time I think of it. A rough, bemused, rugged individualist. I was born this way, and that is the way I will die. I want no one to tell me how to live. I will take it from day to day. I follow no leaders, no set of rules, and don't let anyone lay down rules for me. Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Jennifer. I am so happy to have you here for episode 13 of Errol Flynn Slept Here. This is the final episode of the series, and today we're going to be reading chapter 11. It's called The Death of Mulholland Farm. It has been quite an emotional ride with Errol Flynn, this handsome, charming, tragic, superstar rogue of a man, and to have his story told through the life and death of the home that he built, his beloved home, Mulholland Farm in 1941 from the ground up, how the story of Errol is reflected in the rise and eventual demise of this house is nothing short of extraordinary. Errol was a searcher his entire life. He amazingly was trying to find truth and meaning in everything that he did, even though so often he was a victim not only of circumstance, but of his own poor lack of judgment. This man made so many tragic decisions in his life and had so many moral failings and poor judgment, and it eventually led to him burning out and dying early at the age of 50 years old. The coroner who conducted his autopsy in Vancouver, British Columbia, said that even though he was only 50 when he died, he had the body of an 80-year-old. That's how much hard living Errol did. Yet, amazingly, he always seemed to have such a sense of humor and almost complete lack of ego throughout his entire life. No one was quicker to point out his failings than Errol himself. And actually, it's good that he kept such a unique and just honest perception of himself throughout his life. Had he not, he probably would have died a lot earlier before the age of 50. And in this chapter, we're going to find out exactly how his home eventually got demolished and leveled to the ground. And I gotta say, I'm really happy that Errol was not around to see Mulholland Farm just get demolished, because I really think that would have been just a hole in his soul. That home really was his pride and joy. He built it from the ground up. It was his refuge. It was his naughty little playground. He brought wives there. He brought his children there. And that's the only place that Errol Flynn ever really set down any type of permanence or roots in his life. He did so much traveling. He was such an adventurer. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. You can definitely dive into this episode, even if you haven't watched any other videos in the series. But if you want to dive deeper into this crazy and almost mythical life of Errol Flynn, this tragedy, this human tragedy, you want to dive deeper, you've got to go back to episode 1, because I am telling you, this man's life up until and before age 25 is more crazy and explosive and larger than life than any movie role he ever took on when he became famous in the mid-30s. He did so much living up to the age of 25, and that is what the bulk of his autobiography, My Wicked, Wicked Ways, is about. This man was doing everything from standing on trial for murder, involved in 2 statutory rape trials of which he was acquitted. He was headhunting in New Guinea. He was a tobacco plantation overseer. The man literally lived 10 lifetimes before the age of 25. And also in this series, you find out more about the 2 legendary and magnetic men that lived at Mulholland Farm after Errol's death. The first being the singing cowboy and country music singer and actor Stuart Hamlin, who lived with his family up at Mulholland Farm for 20 years. And then the teen rock 1950s idol sensation Rick Nelson, who exploded into the American lexicon in the 1950s on his parents' famous show, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. He became his own rock sensation superstar in his own right. He is the famous father to Tracy Nelson and Matthew and Gunnar Nelson of Nelson rock duo fame. It's just crazy. You had three famous men and their families all living in Mulholland Farm, all separated by time and space. And I've said this before in other episodes, but it is worth mentioning that all three famous men that lived there, Errol Flynn, Stuart Hamlin, and Rick Nelson, all had their own stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And all three men left their own unique imprint on the house, although none quite as strong and striking as Mulholland's original master, Errol Flynn, who by all accounts never really left the property, because in some of the last episodes we talked about how Stuart Hamlin and his family and how Rick Nelson and his family both disturbingly experienced a lot of paranormal activity, and they all attributed it to the spirit of Errol, which was very, very strong and never left the property. In fact, Gunnar Nelson, Rick Nelson's son, maintains that that house was seriously haunted, and even though it was demolished in 1988, who knows if Justin Timberlake, the famous singer who occupies the land on which the original Mulholland House and Farm was built, who knows if he's experiencing any disruption or spiritual activity from Errol. I've got my handy copy here of My Wicked Ways. If you are into celebrity autobiographies or celebrity biographies in general, this read, it is a page turner. Let me tell you, it's one of those books where you pick it up and hours later you're looking at the clock wondering where all the time went. There's some really good and fascinating quotes from Errol himself in the book that I wanted to read to you. Kind of fitting and somewhat hauntingly poetic to fill out and close the series. And I've also got my Kindle here with chapter 11 pulled up from Errol Flynn Slept Here. So let's get going. Chapter 11, The Death of Mulholland Farm. By the time that Susie Hamlin had convinced her husband that they should purchase Errol Flynn's estate, lots on both corners of the property with Mulholland frontage had been sold. Flynn's 11 acres are now beginning to be whittled away. Susie Hamlin was Stuart Hamlin's wife, the second owners of Mulholland Farm. They lived there the longest, for 20 years, from 1959 to 1979. During the Nelson years at Mulholland, the lower tract of land, formerly owned by Flynn, is subdivided, with access provided over a new right-of-way called Flynn Ranch Road. The barn is raised and the casino building moved to a corner of the property and renovated. And the casino is where Errol notoriously had all of his gambling and his cockfights that went on during all of his famous Hollywood parties. So he was quite the scoundrel, got up to a lot of bad business up in that casino. Upon Rick Nelson's death on December 31st, 1985, a portion of the $750,000 sale price for the house is still owed to the Hamlin family. As this matter moves to resolution and the Nelson estate is settled, Mulholland House sits vacant. In 1987, the upper lot with tennis court goes on the market at a price of $1.6 million. So Rick Nelson, as I talked about in episode 11, tragically died in a New Year's Eve plane crash flying over Texas while he was touring. And so that happens at the very tail end of 1985. And here we are, 1987, and the house is still sitting vacant. There were a lot of money matters to be settled after Rick Nelson tragically died, and his family was in just such deep grief and mourning following the passing of Rick. And I talk about in that episode how nobody alerted the family. They found out the way that you and I would find out if a celebrity passed away. One of the twins, I don't remember which one, found out about his father's passing on the radio, and the other twin found out about it while watching the news with Dan Rather. I mean, just I can't think of anything worse than that. So now we've got the house deserted and vacant and sitting on the market in 1987 for $1.6 million. At this time, as Mulholland is shown to potential buyers, a new personality emerges on the scene. Aspiring filmmaker Jack Marino is a transplant from Everett, Massachusetts, and, with a group of boyhood friends, a longtime admirer of Errol Flynn. Marino gets permission from the real estate agent to visit the house. I got into the house and took a lot of pictures, says Marino. From April 1987 to May of 1988, I was going up there on a weekly basis. I'd go up alone. Most of the time I didn't take my camera because I thought the place was always going to be there. I'd go up there and look the place over. If there were workers there, I'd drop the agent's name and they let me in. Sometimes I'd call the broker and tell him I wanted to go up there. And so if anyone called, he'd say, yeah, I gave him permission. After 6 months on the market, the price for Mulholland drops from 1.6 to 1.3 million. Marino remembers, I happened to be up there one day and Tim Matheson was looking the place over. On another occasion, Marino is surprised to find the gate locked, with a man walking around on the other side of it. Marino explains that he's a friend of the real estate agent, and the man states that he has just bought the house. They strike up a conversation, and Jack Marino is invited inside. He didn't know that much about Errol Flynn, says Marino, so I told him some things. I took him around and showed him the different rooms, the two-way mirror where John Barrymore slept, and about all the parties that Flynn had. The owner shows Marino blueprints for renovations that he intends to make, extending the back of the house near the den and enlarging the second floor. At the end of the day, says Marino, I asked if I could come back. He said, sure, anytime. Jack is greatly relieved that he'll still have access to the place. I mean, can you imagine you bought Mulholland House and you don't even know who Errol Flynn is? I mean, that's just crazy. There was just so much history there. And in one of the other chapters, it talked about how, the house was in such disrepair right before it got demolished. You've got this dingy yellow sun-scorched lawn that all these Hollywood immortals used to tread on, like seriously, people like Clark Gable, Ronald Reagan, Hedy Lamarr, all these Rita Hayworth, like all these unbelievably crazy, huge Hollywood names. And then it's just, sitting alone and vacant and just, sun-baked and just hollow. And it's just so sad. So that filmmaker, Jack Marino, is like, yeah, the house is always going to be here. It's going to be great. No problem. I will also link in the description a documentary film that Jack Marino made on Errol. It was one of the first things I ever watched about Errol, and it's called Tasmanian Devil. I will link it. It is such an interesting documentary. I'm just so fascinated with Errol because he's one of those people where the more you learn about him, the more you want to know about him. And then some of the stuff you find out about Errol and how he lived and what he did, it's so unsavory. And you almost find yourself getting pissed off and angry at him for the choices that he's making because he has such potential. I mean, he's so handsome, he's so charming, he's so intelligent, and you're rooting for him. And, at the heart, I've never really felt that he was a bad guy, but anyway, it's just like the more you learn, you kind of get pissed off at him, but it's crazy. So I'll go ahead and list that in the description. But anyway, let me keep going with the chapter here. So as the months pass, however, the situation changes. Says Jack Marino, I went up there in August of 1987 with my camera. I walked in the house and the place was just about gutted. The living room still had paneling. Some of the doors were off. The den was taken down. The entire second floor was gutted. You could see straight through from one side of the house to the other. I started taking pictures. I think I'm the only one with pictures of that time. And I'll definitely show you some of the pictures that are here in the chapter. And this one shows the living room, and it's really sad. I mean, in such, gutted disrepair, I guess. It says, inglorious last days for the living room. A double wide pocket door that had been used to divide the living room from the bar now leans against the studwork of the far wall. Pickled pine paneling from the den is stacked against the fireplace. And that far window that you see in the picture, that was Errol's beloved den, his favorite room in the entire house. And he usually slept in the leather chair in his den rather than his own bedroom. That's how much he loved his den. Marino asked the owner why the interior is being dismantled. He told me he was putting the house up to code. New wiring because all the wiring was old and brittle. New plumbing, central air. He said he was going to clean the wood and then put everything back. A conflict with City Hall necessitates a halt to the renovations, Marino remembers. By January of 1988, he says, I was only going up there occasionally. It was very depressing. On the first Friday in May 1988, Marino drives up to Mulholland to ask permission of the new owner to give a friend from Boston, also an Errol Flynn admirer, a tour that weekend. When he arrives at the property, Marino is met by a half-dozen workmen and notices that the observatory window was out. The windows in the kitchen area were out. The chimney in the den had been taken down. Marino is told that all are rotting and must be replaced. He receives permission to bring his visitor from Boston, Steve Florentine, to the house. That Sunday, Marino takes Florentine from Burbank Airport straight to Mulholland Farm. According to Jack Marino, we drove up Mulholland and round the bend where you can see the house across the canyon. And I'm driving, and I want to point the house out to Steve. And it's gone. I've seen the house there for 8-9 years, and in that moment, it's gone. I'm thinking my eyes are playing a trick on me. I said, Steve, I don't think the house is there. And as we got to the front of Mulholland, the plateau was empty. I couldn't believe it. I drove up Torreson. The place was torn down. I mean, think about it. The windows were already rotted out. That house wasn't even 50 years old yet when they tore it down in 1988. It's crazy. So there's some pictures in the chapter here of the practically demolished upstairs and downstairs. And it says, house guests sometimes got lost in the maze of rooms upstairs, which made more sense in the deconstruction phase. Ascending the staircase, Flynn's bedroom was to the right. Beyond it was the haunted fourth upstairs bedroom. That was the infamous aqua bedroom. And then there's also a picture of the demolished downstairs. And it says, with panel and plaster removed from the downstairs bedroom, sheer wall blocking can be seen on most of the internal and external walls. The ceiling with the two-way mirror was at left. The spot where the mirror had hung is marked by the splash of sunlight in the ceiling. This room had last served as Rick Nelson's bedroom. He gave it the Elvis treatment, said his son Matthew, covering the windows with tape and tinfoil. So when Rick Nelson famously lived at Mulholland Farm, he chose the downstairs bedroom that had the mirrored ceiling, that had that trap door where from the top you could look down, and that was the bedroom that Rick Nelson slept in. According to Errol Flynn, she went up fast, like the sails of a boat, and she has come down the same way, as if her sails had been struck. That day, Marino calls another acquaintance, Flynn biographer Tony Thomas, to tell him of the demolition of Mulholland. Thomas is a co-author of The Films of Errol Flynn, the first critical appraisal of the actor's career, plus other books, including From a Life of Adventure, The Writings of Errol Flynn. Thomas is shocked to hear the news, and he asks Marino to drive him to the site. The next morning, Marino, Florentine, and Thomas make the trip from Burbank over Barnum and Cahuenga to tortuous Mulholland Drive. As we drove up Torreson, says Marino, there were two women getting out of an LTD. I asked Tony if he knew who they were. He said, that's Nora Flynn. Nora was crying, very upset. Deidre was very quiet, very upset. Nora Flynn, also known as Nora Eddington, that was her maiden name. She was Errol's second wife, and Errol had two children with Nora. He had Deidre Flynn, his first daughter, and he had Rory Flynn, and that's who they're talking about in this paragraph. So again, Nora was crying, very upset. Deidre was very quiet, very upset. When you first meet Deidre, she doesn't talk. She's a very quiet person. Nora said, who would do such a thing? This is the house I came to as a bride. I had my first child here. They stand there surveying the scene a long time, and Marino documents the ruins in a series of photos. Deidre Flynn snaps a picture of Tony Thomas, Jack Marino, and Steve Florentine standing by the living room fireplace, where the Decker painting had once hung. On a sunny day in May 1988, these 5 people are there for the end of this old, likely haunted house. The owner who had ordered the raising of Mulholland House never does build there. The 3.5-acre parcel, including the pool, tennis court, and Japanese garden, is eventually sold for $4.3 million. Actress Helen Hunt then acquires the land and designs and builds a mansion there, nearly doubling the footprint of the old place. Later, Justin Timberlake will acquire it and continues to live there as of this writing. And I believe this book was written in 2009. And by all accounts, I looked it up and I think he still does live on that land. One particular attribute of the property attracts him. Man, it's the reason I bought the house, he tells Matthew Nelson. Best view on the planet. So I guess that's what Justin Timberlake told Rick Nelson's son, Matthew Nelson. Aside from the street sign reading Flynn Ranch Road, nothing is left to connect the place to the actor. The tennis court remains, though it's been resurfaced many times and hides behind fences and landscaping. The casino still stands, although it's been gutted and renovated and moved 20 yards away from its original location to an obscure corner of the old Flynn property. When asked if she ever visits 7740 Mulholland Drive, Stuart Hamblin's granddaughter, Kim Jassery, thinks a moment. After I heard that the house was torn down, I couldn't believe it. It was almost like a death in the family. That was a home that had an awful lot of memories, so why go over and see where somebody's torn down all those memories? The ground isn't important. The house is what made it special. The spirit of the people is what made it special, the history. I don't want to make myself depressed. It's almost like a gravesite. Another former resident does pay occasional homage at Torreyson Place, but not because of fond memories. For Matthew Nelson, growing up at Mulholland has been a test of survival through hard family times, and the spot where he had last seen his dad. That whole era of my life, I guess you could say, was pretty tied to that house, says Matthew. I drive past usually about once a year. I drive around the cul-de-sac. I occasionally see a neighbor who was living across the street. And his feelings upon hearing that the house had been demolished? I was actually glad because, frankly, he says, I didn't have the best memories of it. For us, there was nothing great about that house. And then the last shots are of the views of the den fireplace. The first one says, looking north toward the San Fernando Valley, it shows the platform that held the downstairs bedroom and its two-way mirror. And then the second one, looking east toward the mountains, with the den fireplace standing, shows the living room platform in the foreground and a shadow of the circular bar visible at extreme right. So that's where Errol would have all of his Hollywood parties. And then it says, the day after the demolition of Errol Flynn's Mulholland Farm in May 1988, filmmaker Jack Marino visited the site with his friend Steve Florentine and Flynn biographer Tony Thomas. And here they pose in front of Errol's living room fireplace. And then the next picture shows the house that Justin Timberlake is now living in, the one that Helen Hunt built over the land that she purchased. And then there's another picture of the land, and it says by 1987, the lower pasture had been bulldozed and exclusive homes were under construction along a new private drive called Flynn Ranch Road. In this view, the farm is still standing on the plateau above, and the casino, far lower left, has been moved about 20 yards. So that's probably one of the last pictures ever taken of Mulholland Farm. And then there's actually a picture of the little road called Flynn Ranch Road. And it says the road at the right once was Flynn's driveway, which became a street called Torreyson Place. In Hollywood's golden age, Flynn, his cronies, his house guests, and his partygoers made a daily trek up and down this road to access his bachelor's paradise. Off Torreyson is the gated and highly secure Flynn Ranch Road, where several exclusive homes were built on the lower Mulholland Farm property. And what's really interesting is in the chapter, there are sketches, architect sketches of Mulholland House, the first floor and the second floor. And it talks about how Errol conceived of and what he had in mind when he was building the home. And the look of it, it says in the chapter here, reflects what Errol had seen of structures near all the oceans that he had sailed. He loved the ocean. He loved his yachts. And he would notice that they would have steep pitched roofs and dormer windows that would always go to a central spiral staircase. And that's exactly how he built the house. And when he was conceiving of the interior, what he wanted it to be like, he was thinking about all the grand homes that he had visited in the first 5 years of his career, going from Sam Simeon's house to Pickfair, which was where Mary Pickford and her husband, Douglas Fairbanks, lived. They were were like the reigning king and queen of Hollywood in the 20s and early 30s. So that's what he had in mind when he conceived of the house and built the house. It was going to be the ultimate bachelor pad, kind of like by the sea, even though it wasn't by the sea, but that's what he had always envisioned in his mind of how he wanted to build his house. And there's several photos of his house, and one of them looks kind of nondescript, but it's the view from the outside of the infamous Aqua bedroom, which was supposedly one of the more haunted bedrooms upstairs. Matthew Nelson, who had slept in pretty much every bedroom on the upstairs floor of Mulholland House, said that that bedroom was kind of weird. Some of the grandchildren of Stuart and Susie Hamblin experienced some kind of weird rumblings up there, weird mists going in and out of the room and in the nearby adjacent hallway. But in this particular picture, it says, this is Tully Brown's room, which is one of the Hamblin grandchildren. His view out of the door of the Aqua bedroom as he watched what he described as a cloud of energy moving about in the hallway. In Flynn's day, a display case that contained a ship model stood in the nook where you can see the light streaming in. There was a brass plaque on the display case, and it bore part of a poem written in 1916 by, ironically, a woman, Ella Wheeler Wilcox, and this is the poem. One ship drives east and another west by the self-same winds that blow. 'Tis the set of the sails and not the gales that determines the way to go. Errol Flynn told his second wife, Nora Eddington, that these words conjured up adventure. It's what keeps a man alive, he said. And I find that so interesting, especially in the poem where it says one ship drives east and another west. And that to me explains so perfectly the duality of Errol's personality, how he struggled his whole life to search for good and truth and meaning, but by the same token, always being dragged down into a pit of despair, really, just anchored by all his own moral failings and just bad choices and bad judgments, his descent into eventual just darkness with, alcoholism and all the things that plagued him, all his financial woes that he had in his life. It's just such a great poem, and it does conjure up those feelings of adventure and just manliness, because he was such a man's man. He was such a rugged dude, He really was one of the last epitome of the 20th century adventure-seeking man. The type of man that you don't really see too much of in the 21st century. I don't really think that we have a lot of strong kind of just like overtly male guys in our culture nowadays, especially not on screen the way we used to have back in the day. To finish out this series, I thought that I would read to you a little bit from my Wicked, Wicked Ways, because I find it very apt. And you've got the one part of his personality going one way, the other part going the other, and it just marries together all in this complex and tragic man. And these excerpts that I'm going to read, they are sad, but at the same time, they're just full of self-effacing humor. And I don't think that Errol took himself too seriously in his life, though at the same time it was weird because he did find himself a tragic figure and he didn't really understand himself, let alone other people. And I do feel that his ultimate tragedy was he was always searching for love and he was always searching for meaning, and he really wanted to connect with a woman. Ultimately, I think because of his really harsh and failed relationship with his mother. So he really grew up both loving women and kind of hating them at the same time, wanting to be with them, longing to have a deep connection, but then at the same time, not trusting them at all. And it's completely exemplified in what he writes here. So in the section of my Wicked, Wicked Ways called An Actor's Life for Me, there's a section in here where he talks about a week-long rendezvous with a woman that he names as Amelia Oliphant. And there has been a lot of debate, because I've gone down the rabbit hole on this one. There's been a lot of debate as to who exactly this woman is, because it's apparent that Errol is using a pseudonym. Now, there are a few people that have surmised that this Amelia that he writes of in the book is actually actress Olivia de Havilland, the famous on-screen love and co-star of Errol in 7 of his movies. And they never got together in real life, allegedly, but they kind of had a real mutual love and trust of one another, and a kind of like an unrequited love relationship that both bore them a lot of longing and pain, supposedly. And she admitted in later interviews throughout her life that she really did love Errol and, did find herself in love with him, as did he to her. But she also said that, she basically knew that she couldn't be with him. She couldn't marry him because she knew what kind of man he was. She knew what kind of life he led. And she knew that it would basically forever lead to her unhappiness if she got entangled with him. So he describes in this section of the book a week-long cruise down the Mississippi River in a steamboat, where he's on boat with this Amelia, and it's just a week of bliss. And mind you, at the time, he's married to his French film star Lily Demita, and this Amelia, this pseudonym lady, right? She's married, has a husband of her own and a child, so they're both cheating on their respective spouses, but they're just entangled in this, impossible, passionate love affair. And he describes this woman saying that she's probably the only woman he ever really loved up to that time. But it was, they were star-crossed, they were ill-fated. There was no way they were really going to be able to live together and come out as a couple. So when he's talking about it, he knows that it's doomed, right? The reason that I wanted to even read this part because it directly segues into when he started building Mulholland House. And I really do think because he could not see this passionate love affair into real life, into fulfillment, into a real relationship, I think the sorrow of that led to this passion project of his that was to build Mulholland Farm. So Errol writes, "My inability to get together with her in a real way, meaning Amelia, the complication which she represented in my life, had a deep effect upon me. It sharpened the schism between Lily and me. It made me sense the hopelessness of ever finding a real, a permanent, a workable relationship with any woman. Something, perhaps it was biological, stood between me and a prolonged relationship with even so wonderful a creature as Amelia. I plunged into picture making and tried not to figure out the tangle of my relationships. Besides, I now had a new interest, Mulholland House, overlooking the San Fernando Valley. I designed the house myself. I would make of it a playhouse, a spot for rest, recreation, good living, romping, roistering, and cultured living too. She went up fast, like the sails of a boat. At the onset, she only cost me $35,000. Later, as I extended her and improved her, the total cost went to $125,000. She snuggled on the side of the hill. Inside, in most of her rooms, there were mirrors that brought the beauty of the valley into the house. The swimming pool was almost in my living room. Outside was a riding ring, below on the hillside a tennis court, and a little way off I had stables for cockfights. That was in the casino that I was telling you about earlier. Of course, cockfighting was against the law, but we had it anyway on Sunday nights. I mean, why would Errol care if anything was against the law? I mean, really, if you've watched this series, you know that he did stuff that was against the law all the time. We had exciting Sunday evenings. I and my cowboy friends, the actors who played with me in the westerns, and the Hollywood sports who hung around me. In the barn, you would have the smell of horses, the smell of fighting cocks, and the smell of cowboys, all watching these two game birds peck each other to death. Even my horses loved the cockfights. They peered over their bars at the two birds. The interior of the house wasn't ornate, but it was beautiful and practical, and there were plenty of room. It's kind of like Errol's life, kind of like Errol describing himself. Not ornate, but just beautiful and practical with plenty of room for everyone, right? Life's just a party. Room for guests, room for fun, rooms for eating, a room for reading, leopard skin on the floor, and a Van Gogh on the wall, all originals. There were glass cases for firearms. I collected guns, but I hated to use them. I had miniatures of boats in cases under glass on the wall, schooners, barkentines. Of course, there was a bar of my own design. Fancy a house in Hollywood without a private bar. On the wall in back of the bar was a very special painting of a Mexican bullfight. But I think I liked my den the best of all. Here was my desk next to a window where the California light streamed in. There I often sat on weekends when I barred the doors and I wrote or tried to write. He was a published author as well. This is his third book. He wrote 2 fiction novels as well in his lifetime. Nearby was a fireplace and wood was on the hearth, and when it was cool, the logs burned and the room was aglow. I thought sometimes, how is all this? I am still in my early 30s and I am sitting on top of the world. Here's my home. Out there is the valley. Beyond are the people who are writing me all that fan mail. I wonder how Coates is. Whatever happened to Jack Ryan and Dusty Miller? Those were people that he shared a lot of adventures with in his life. What strange things can happen to a man and in so short a time? I had it all figured out now that the place was built. This was a bachelor house. No woman would live here with me. Not Lily, not anyone else. Sure, I'd have them visit me, but this was for me to roam around in, alone. Outside, rolling away in back of the house, was the farm where there were horses and cows and wallabies, chickens, dogs, cats, everything. Mine. There are some things a man has to have to himself. A busy fellow like Flynn needs some peace sometimes. These are some of the passages that I have highlighted to read to you guys to end our Errol Flynn Slept Here series. I know I am contradiction inside contradiction. I know that truth is sometimes an octagon and that I am one. I can love women and hate them, and this may seem a contradiction. Contradiction is a cardinal element of life, and of itself it may be no contradiction. You can love every instant of living and still want to be dead. I know this feeling often. Don't tell me that contradiction is wrong. Some people say that is a contradiction, as if something defies logic or understanding and is therefore not true. I might be quite famous, but not feel famous, only feel sometimes like a heel. I can be worth 1 million or 2 million and feel like a bum, and be a bum and live like a bum. Tell me of paradox. My awareness of my own paradox does only one thing to me. It makes me laugh. When I see and sense myself doing something inconsistent, opposite to what I think I believe, I realize it and I laugh. What else can you do when you're all rolled up in the same package of personality? Here is duality and singularity at the same time. I know that it is possible to say something at one time and believe it and know it is true, and to say its opposite at another time, and it can, in other circumstances, be just as true. I know there are 2 men inside me. One wants to ramble and has rambled around the globe more than once, in the sky and below water. The other man is a settled fellow who thinks sometimes he is or should be a husbandman, and that he should sit settled in a house by the side of the road or by the side of the sea. Both are inside of me. Each is true. No, contradiction has a place in human nature, in social values, just as it has in mathematics. Contradiction is neither true nor false. If they say I'm inconsistent, let them say it, for it is true, because inconsistency is a part of living nature. I am the epitome of the 20th century cosmopolitanism, but I should have been born an explorer in the time of Magellan. I am sour on women, but can't do without them, and I need them incessantly so as to feed my sourness. I am bitter about what Lily Demeta did to me, but I also laugh about it. I crave the indulgence of my senses, but this is countered by an interior desire that is even keener than my senses to know the meaning of things. I want to be taken seriously. I feel that I am inwardly serious, thoughtful, even tormented, but in practice I yield to the fatuous. I have a zest for living, yet twice an urge to die. I have a genius for living, but I turn many things into crap. I am dangerous to be with because, since I live dangerously, others are subject to the danger that I expose myself to. They, more likely than I, will get hurt. I will do a great deal for a buck. Then, when I get it, I will throw it away or let it be taken from me. I'm very tough, but I'm also a patsy. The pursuit of gold, pleasure, and danger motivate most of my springs. I am alternatively very kind, very cruel. I love art, but finance may be my forte. I want faith, but I am faithless. I look for causes, and they wind up with me a romp. I love myself and hate myself. I want to be loved, but I may myself be incapable of really loving. I hate the legend of myself as a phallic representation, yet I work at it to keep it alive. I despise mediocrity above all things. I fear it, yet I know some of my performances have been mediocre. I generally deny that I was ever a good actor, but I know I have turned in half a dozen good performances. I call myself a bum, but I have been working hard most of the days of my adult life. I portray myself as wicked, hoping I will not be regarded as wicked, but I may really be wicked in the biblical sense. Women do not let me stay single. I do not let myself stay married. Cheers for Mama. Damn her too. Give me the artistic life, except when I'm producing, directing, organizing, banking, playing the stock market, and in other ways being a businessman. I hate the law and I spend too much time with lawyers. I've been called the eternal sophomore, the perennial youth. I can do nothing to alter this. I am hung with it. The stamp is upon me. It's too late for me to become a scientist, saint, or messiah. If I symbolize anything, it is that I am the eternal subversive. I laugh a lot and I weep secretly more often than most men. I have quested all my life for truth and I wallow in bromines. The bromines themselves wallow in truth. I live polygamously, but I am fascinated by people who appear happily monogamously. I am on the side of the underdog, except when I am on the side of the rich. Errol writes from Port Antonio in March 1954. I am in my mid-40s. They say I am a sight to behold, compared with my looks a few years back. I can hear them a few feet away. My God, how he's changed. People don't like me or envy the way I live. It seems absurd, ridiculous, and laughable that somebody should tell me how to behave during my brief span here on this earth. I feel like rebelling every time I think of it. A rough, bemused, rugged individualist. I was born this way, and that is the way I will die. I have no clear-cut system of philosophy. I want none. I want no design for living. I want no one to tell me how to live. I will take it from day to day. I follow no leaders, no set of rules, and don't let anyone lay down rules for me. I don't think we could have ended the series any better than with Errol's own words. I want to thank you guys so much for joining me on this journey into Errol Flynn's life through the book Errol Flynn Slept Here. It's been a wild ride, and I've said it before, I pray for the soul of Errol Flynn. I don't think that anyone was more down on Errol than Errol himself. I really do believe that he knew that the way that he lived his life was ultimately lacking. It lacked a center point of focus. It lacked real deep love. And he was a searcher. He searched his whole life. And I do find comfort and solace in the fact that he had so many biblical quotes sprinkled in the introduction of My Wicked, Wicked Ways. That to me, says a little bit about he knows what he did. He knows where he's headed. Maybe at the last moments of his life, he did lean on the Lord. And I do pray, hopefully, he has found happiness and he has found peace. So thank you so much for joining me. And ever the consummate host and charmer, I'm sure Errol would have been so happy to have you on this journey with us. Thanks so much, and I will talk to you guys very, very soon. See you on the next book. Bye.
Wasn't I a nasty character? Wasn't I horrible? Oh, well. Goodbye now.